Welcome, everyone, to the Common Sense Podcast. I'm the host, Kai Dew. It's good to be with you. This week, we have a very special episode. Joining me is none other than the rock pastor himself, the man behind I Am British Real, Mr. Pastor Superstar, Ricky Doolan. Ricky, good to have you with us. So thankful that you're joining us this week on the Common Sense Podcast. And Lord knows we could do with a bit of common sense in British politics.
Indeed, sir, and thank you so much for having me on. It's a great honor, and that intro was too good and too big, but I receive it, and no, it's good to be here. And yes, common sense. It seems to be something we have a great shortage of in the world. If we can manufacture some common sense, I think we'll be in business.
Well, I completely agree. Now, we have had two very, very interesting weeks in British politics. I want to get your thoughts on probably the biggest story of last week, something that I was, because of traveling and everything else, wasn't able to cover on the podcast. But Don't Call Me Dave is back in town. We must now call him Lord Dave. And David Cameron, former British Prime Minister, is back in the cabinet. What are you thinking about that?
Very interesting move. I wasn't too fond of him as a Prime Minister, to be honest. So now he's back as Lord, and in the cabinet, it's a whole different story. But I think there's more than meets the eye. And I'm sure that there's some plans and tactics behind this re-emergence of Mr. Cameron somewhere down the line. But to be honest, the whole party politics is something that needs a bit of life. I think we have seen the demoralization of the British people, and they need somebody to look up to. They need something in that parliament to be able to pin their hopes on. And at the minute, there's nothing. And David Cameron's certainly not the answer to that. Mr. Farage could be the answer to that, but they're few and far between after that. And you know, I just look at Cameron. I just think it's another globalist. It's another Rishi Sunak. It's another Liz Truss. And you know, if they're planning for him to be in number 10, then I don't see any glimmer of hope or passion for that move in terms of being good for the country.
Well, I think a lot's got to happen if Cameron was to ever come back as Prime Minister. First off, he's got to win a constituency and be a member of the House of Commons, something also that Nigel Farage would have to do. And I have to be honest, this year I was quite surprised to see Nigel Farage at the Conservative Party conference, but since then rumours are abound about him making a return to the Conservative Party, with the potential of maybe making a leadership challenge if he gets elected. I worked for Farage and Richard Tice at both the Brexit Party and Reform Party. I'll be honest with you and lay my cards on the table. I wouldn't trust either of them as far as I could pick them up and throw them. And I at the moment, I stand by what I say when I say, in my personal opinion, I think that Richard Tice is only in it for himself. Certainly not in it for the betterment of the country. And Reform, although they've surged ahead in the polls to 11 or 12%, I think, in the last few days because of everything that's happened last week, Reform are not the party that I would want in control. In fact, right now, I don't think there is a single party in Westminster or trying to get into Westminster that I think would be the better option. What I would suggest is, for at least one, if not two parliamentary cycles, that we go the route of Winston Churchill in the Second World War, but this time we do it with 650 independently elected MPs, completely devoid of the parliamentary system, and in one fell swoop we smash the multi-party system of Westminster once and for all. So when are you available to take on the job as Prime Minister?
Anytime you want. Right now. We can start right now, today.
Well, I could think of far worse people that could be Prime Minister, and I'll volunteer to be your SPAD. For those that don't know what a SPAD is, that's the special advisor. That's probably my goal.
You're hired.
I might not last as long as Dominic Cummings with Boris Johnson, though, but we'll wait and see. So, we've set the stage. British politics, a very interesting thing. I want to come to your movement that you're building, I Am Britain Real, but we'll get there because I want to end on that. I like to end the podcast on a high. I think this week, one of the biggest things that we should talk about is having just seen the Dutch right-wing party win the largest number of seats within the Dutch parliament. Is right-wing the right thing?
Well, I definitely think with your deputy named program, that common sense is the right thing, and certainly the European people, or should we say the Western people, have had enough of this kind of fake politics, this plastic politics of not standing with facts, with media spins, fabrications, and people that just don't seem passionate about their home countries or passionate about the people of their home countries. And I think for sure that's created a polar opposite, an alternative type of voter. And we saw that with Donald Trump, obviously, in America in recent years, where, it was the silent majority is what they called it. Same with the Brexit. And that's what we've just seen in Holland. It's potentially what we're going to see next year in France. We are more than likely going to see it in America again. And it definitely, I'm almost certain if the right candidate was in British politics, we would see it here as well. The people have just had enough.
Well, that leads on to something else that's arisen following this, that everybody's favourite idiot, sorry, I shouldn't say that, although I do mean it, Guy Verhofstadt, the wonderful Belgian well, I want to call him the court jester because he does make everybody laugh. But he's now leading the charge as of today, the day that we're recording, for the establishment of the European Defence Force, which is what Mr. Farage has been going on about for many, many years. They want a European army.
Yeah.
But there were interesting things that he said in some of the stuff that they brought out today, is that the European Defence Force would be used to quell rebellions against the European Union, and including countries that want to trigger Article 50. They would be forced to not be able to do it. So to me, the globalist agenda is really leading the charge, particularly within Europe, and it's meeting a lot of opposition. When we look at some of the Eastern Bloc countries, Hungary is a great example of a country that's, Poland is now looking at it. Italy, people forget that Italy has been trying for years to change their constitution to be able to hold a referendum on their membership of the European Union, even when Sergio Berlusconi was president there. Now with Giorgia Meloni, she is definitely right-wing leaning, and the last few weeks, one of the key policies that comes up with a lot of right-wing parties and a lot of right-wing politicians and leaders is the whole immigration thing. So your understanding, because I know that you are the brainchild behind, the founder of I Am Britain Real, or it's I Am British Real, isn't it? Immigration plays a massive role in a lot of these countries wanting to get out of the European Union, looking at controlling their borders. The US has a massive problem on their southern border. We have massive uncontrolled immigration throughout Europe and coming into the United Kingdom on the boats crossing the channel. So what are your thoughts on where we need to be making some moves in that whole immigration debate?
Yeah, it's something that is just, it's been one of the darkest things in our generation, I would say, that's took place in our country in terms of Britain and also Europe and the West, which is that, the public have been completely swindled and lied to about this whole immigration issue. The globalists and the global bodies are the ones really driving it. And, countries like Britain have simply been subject to it. And no matter how many times Rishi Sunak says we're going to stop the boats, and cleverly and, braver men before him they ain't stopped the boats, and it's like you rightly said, it's the one thing that is driving the European public crazy. To see that uncontrolled migrants are just coming in at massive rates with no documentation, with no background checks, with no real true identifications, not knowing whether they're terrorists, not knowing whether they hate our country, not knowing whether they're going to be the next person to knife some of the British public on the streets or in the underground or whatever it is. And only, today, the day we saw Dublin, Ireland, there's an immigrant that's stabbed children on the streets. So it's so frustrating that the politicians, the government, don't seem to have as much care about the British public than the British public do. And that's why the British public are looking for an alternative of somebody that actually cares. That's why over in America, Donald Trump was so well loved and still is, because he actually not only spoke care for the American people, but he acted it in his policies and his actions as the president there. And I know that the British people are looking for that in politicians, and they can't find it anywhere. And with I Am British, I mean, what I see in the comments, like I said at the beginning of the show, is I see demoralization. I see people who love their country, who love their culture, who love being British and are proud of it, but they're so demoralized that they've been told Britain is rubbish, Britain is racist, Britain is just like the worst place, just criminals who went around the world raping and pillaging. And the demoralization is so big that actually if one person or if one group or if one party or anybody could just come and demonstrate for real. Remember, we're tired of words. We're tired of promises. We're tired of fake, empty policies and political promises. If someone could come for real and really passionately stand for the people, I'm sure that person would become so popular in this country, just the way that Geert Wilders has managed to do it in Holland. I mean, they didn't give him a chance. They called him far-right, racist and all this stuff for many years. I mean, he's been on the scene for many years. We've known about him for years, but look at that. He's been elected now. So it shows the breaking point is we're way past the breaking point. And it's the same in Britain. And, what we saw on Remembrance Day this year really kind of cemented that the establishment is not interested in preserving our culture, protecting our culture, or representing our people. And that's the reason why the people are ready for something new.
Well, let me ask you this then. We've seen a rise of what is now called the far right. These right-wing extremists. I don't think they're all. I mean, there are some that are extreme, but I can't categorize everybody in that thing. Is the rise of the far right, or let's just say the right-wing politics, is that the antithesis to what's happening because of the proliferation of liberalism over the last decade or so? Or is there a more sinister undertone that we should be paying attention to?
Well, the sinister undertone is on the far left. This one is for sure. The sinister undertone is on the far left. It's on those that are manipulating the public, those that are lying to the public about everything that we're seeing, whether it be the COVID-19 pandemic, whether it be the elections, whether it be the plans of the globalist powers. The danger is on the far left now. What they're doing is they're using their media outlets, they're using their propaganda techniques to create a non-existent far right, that they're projecting that this created far right that they're talking about is some type of existential threat to our Western societies. Yet our Western societies, as anybody knows, is already under attack, and it's definitely not coming from anything called the far right. So what they label as far right, 98% of the time, in my experience of just being in and around politics or watching politics, studying politics, being immersed in politics, 98% of the time they use the label far right. It's incorrectly applied, and it's not true. For example, those that wanted President Trump to visit the UK when he was president and he'd not been here were labeled as far right. So how wanting the democratically elected American president to come to Britain as an ally deems you to be far right is obviously nonsensical. So when they use this term far right, it's normally a lie. So it's a smoke and mirror and a distraction from the reality that the far left are up to no good. And that's where the real danger is. And I think most people have figured it out, and most people with common sense have figured it out. It's just a case of really a representation for the common sense of people to be in British politics. And you know, like I said, apart from Mr. Farage who's in the jungle right now, there's not many about.
Well, my experiences have taught me that, you know, when the Liberals throw around terms like racist and homophobic and, you know, Islamophobic and all of these things, the reality is very, very far from it. I can remember being at Russia Today. In fact, it was the week after President Trump was inaugurated, and I was there with another pastor, and one of the young commentators on the show that morning was talking about the racism that he experienced because a security guard had followed him around the store. And afterwards we were talking, and my friend the pastor said, well, you know, I can remember as a child waking up and seeing the burning cross of the KKK on the front lawn. You know, when we keep throwing around these terms at everything, oh, that's racist, this is racist, it actually devalues real racism, real bigotry, real hatred. Right. And that leads me to a conclusion that it's too easy just to throw these terms around. So they become a slur. They become an attack on an individual or an organization simply because you don't hold the same view as those that are making the accusations against you. Yes, 100% correct. It's a technique that's being used by the Liberals, by the far left, to shut down debate, to shut down the voice and the sound and maybe the truth of somebody's opinion, and they will throw that everywhere. That's why you hear far right. I remember I went to a protest where they were doing the what's it called, the drag story time hour, and we went to a protest there to say, look, leave children out of this kind of political indoctrination towards transgenderism, and of course we were labelled far right for being there, and homophobic and transphobic and all these other phobics. So they're presenting a certain worldview that, might I add, is the majority of the time anti-Christian. Yeah. So if I'm a pastor, I'm a Christian, so I have my views as a Christian. That is taught, that I've adapted from the teachings of the Bible and the way of life and the morals and the principles that I live by. Now, all of these things that you are mentioning, transphobic, okay, transgender is not something that is agreeable when it comes to my faith. Homophobic, okay, homosexuality is not agreeable to my faith. Islamophobic, okay, Islam is not agreeable to my faith. So whilst everybody has got the right to exercise these things in their life if they choose to, these are all choices. To me and my principles, it goes against my principles. So I can never support these things. So a lot of these agendas that are being pushed by the far left are very anti-Christian. And when you think about the West and Britain, America, Europe, they're traditionally Judeo-Christian lands. So what's been inserted into the society and, dare I say, the culture, is these anti-Christian type of ideologies, and it's very destructive to the fabric of our nation and the Western nations. And I do believe it's very tactical and strategic in order to disrupt and in order to
break that foundation that has served Britain, served the West so well, to get them to be these powerhouses and these amazing places to live, the most desirable places to live in the world, in fact.
Yeah.
And they're breaking up the fabric of that foundation by inserting these ideologies into the society. And they've been doing that over a number of years. And that's really the truth of what it is, you know.
Well, last year I spoke at a conference, and the topic for my speech was the failures of multiculturalism. And
Right.
and I have long held the belief that multiculturalism has failed across the board. It doesn't work.
100%.
And the problem is that within a culture, and I've seen it too many times, both on a national scale and just in the local community. We used to do a lot of ministry, because people listening to the podcast know that I'm a man of faith as well, being a clergyman. So we do the dangerous. We mix politics and religion in one podcast. You know, the two things they say never discuss. I just ignore buck the trends. But we used to do a lot of ministry amongst the Brazilian community in the UK, but that was a community that never did anything to interact with British culture. They kept themselves. And there's a lot of cultures within the UK that have come from another country, from another culture, that have refused to integrate themselves into the melding pot of British cultural society, rather staying on the outside of that pot and trying to force, as you said, their culture onto ours, with the idea of both destroying and supplanting the culture that was in. And when I made this comment on Twitter, I got some serious backlash, because I was told about, you know, the British Empire and goodness knows what. And then I thought, well, let's have a look at the British Empire in comparison to other empires. And it turns out the British Empire was quite small compared to other countries that colonized other parts of the world. But it's very difficult to say, well, you've destroyed our culture, when I'm careful to use the example of Australian Aboriginals. But when Britain made Australia a penal colony and started to impose culture, British culture, within that area, you know, if we leave the originating culture there, we're talking about a tribe of people that hundreds and hundreds of years ago were cannibals. They were flesh eaters. And so there are improvements that you make, that, you know, there are ways that you can better a culture, but it requires
just slight improvements there.
Yeah, exactly.
Eating other humans.
Yeah, but it's that interaction of, you know, when you want to bring elements of your culture for the bettering of a society, then, you know, it contributes to the society that it enters, but it doesn't it's not trying to supplant, is the word you know I'm trying to get to. Right now, what we see, particularly in Britain and across Europe, more than anything else, is Judeo-Christian values being supplanted by a religious ideology, and people forget, you know, to say something bad about any member of the Muslim faith now, we're immediately categorized as being racist. But Islam is not a race, it's a religion.
Right.
And there's got to be this distinction between, I have the right to oppose your religious beliefs. And this is what I've said. Now, I make you'll laugh at this. I make a joke all the time, because I tell people I'm not homophobic, I'm not Islamophobic, I'm not transphobic. In fact, I'm none of these phobics. My solution is I just hate everybody equally, and it solves all the problems, you know. But that isn't the case. I love Muslims, but I disagree with Islam.
Which one? That's it.
You know, we, as churchmen, we love the sinner. We just don't agree with the sin, and we don't accept the sins. But I don't accept my own sins. That's why I live my life, even within politics. And Lord knows there's an awful lot of sin within the political environment. But you live to try and be a better person, a better believer. And I think that we have this dangerous place where, especially as we have a king and a future king now that are really promoting a multiculturalist idea within Britain. I believe we can be a multi-ethnic nation, but I don't believe we could be a multicultural nation.
not possible. It's a recipe for disaster. It's already proven, and as I said, the element that made our cultures and our Western nations to be so desirable was that it was built, prospered on Judeo-Christian values, and the diminishing of that is only devaluing and degrading the landscape of these nations, because it can never stand, and because you can't have the majority of the culture being British culture, Judeo-Christian values, or raised on Judeo-Christian values, and then all of a sudden you are now compromising them values and them principles for the sake of people that came in from foreign lands. And that's really the basic of what's happened and what's happening. And we saw it on Remembrance Day, when, it's a very sacred day, a very, special day for most British people, where we have had our grandfathers, our great-grandfathers serving the wars, in the world wars. And, I had, my grandfather's brothers were in World War I, World War II. They landed on Normandy beaches and survived. And, Remembrance Day is just part of my culture. It's something that I'm instilling into my children. And, it's something that is always going to be important in my family's life and many British people's families' lives. And for people to disrespect that day in such a way like they did this year, by holding this march for Palestine, this free Palestine, this fake thing that they're doing, it shows that the culture is not being respected by the people that have been brought in from different cultures. And whilst we could point the finger at those individuals, it's really the lack of preservation from the government and the governing bodies, police force, etc., for them to put so little value on our cultural principles and our cultural identity, is the reason why other people can exploit it and disrespect it so much. So that really is where the problem is. The problem is that our culture is not being valued by those that have the authority and the power to make that value to be long-standing. And the flip side example of that is countries like United Arab Emirates and Qatar, where their government is very hands-on at making sure their culture is respected and preserved and strong in their nation. And whilst other people are welcome into their country, they're not welcome to come into their country and disrespect their culture. And that, unfortunately, is the biggest tragedy in Britain and these Western countries, is that the governments and the powers that be have totally took off the restraints and made it completely legitimate to disrespect our culture. And it is the British people and the people of these countries like us that are refusing. And we're the ones who are saying, okay, if you're not going to stand up for our culture, then we're going to do it. And we're never going to back down, because this is our heritage, this is our history, this is our family, this is our lineage, and it's something that's important to the people of these lands. So it's really important that our culture is something that is respected and something that is held dear. And like I said, once we can have people in Parliament who are also feeling the same way, not in a fake way, in a political way, but a real way, it would be a refreshing change, I tell you that.
Now, speaking of Parliament, I've long held the opinion, and politicians need to remember that they govern by consent. We've seen Brexit referendum being ignored. We've seen parliamentary or constituency wishes being ignored. We've seen the erosion of British culture and what's happening because governments are legislating and schools and universities are indoctrinating our youngsters to a particular way of life that is very anti-British because of the Judeo-Christian beliefs and principles within British culture and British society. I am now at this point, and see if you track with me on this, and I want to know where you would be in this particular thing. Politicians, government governs by consent. It's the will of the people. Right. But when a government actively legislates in direct opposition to the will of the people,
Yes.
it is my belief that we, the people, need to withdraw that consent and withdraw it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, we're in a position where I don't think there is a politician in Westminster that has a legitimate mandate to form a government or continue in the government, because we, the people, are being ignored. Now, we don't have a written constitution like the US that says, government for the people, by the people. We do have elected officials, but especially with the rise of what happened with the global pandemic, it seems like we are looking at parliamentarians taking on a more autocratic role. An example is, the Welsh government here with their blanket moves for national speed limits and a new relationship and sex education program in schools that the parents can no longer object to without being dealt with. They'll prosecute parents for kids not being in school to be taught sex education as young as 3, but they don't solve crime and fix it. So I'm genuinely of this belief that we need, as a British public, to start withdrawing our consent to be governed by the people that are currently governing, and we need to do something about it and put the power back in the hands of the people.
It's interesting. I mean, if either we're a democracy or we're not, and whilst presenting ourselves as a democracy, as you said, it's more like a dictatorship, or as many people are saying, a tyranny, where it doesn't matter what the people think or the people vote. We're going to just go ahead and do what we want anyway. We voted Brexit. Brexit has never really happened up until this day. They've tried a number of different spins to falsely try and demonstrate that Brexit didn't work, including all of the cost of living going up, etc., which was a lot to do with this Ukraine debacle that's took place. But they, if the British people are not going to be listened to, then we're definitely not a democracy. They demonstrated it, like you said, during the COVID-19. It was a very good example of how a tyrannical government or system or organization can suppress the people. We were not given an option. We were not given a choice. Many people, including myself, could see straight through the lies, could see that we're being told lies on television every single day here. These death statistics are not accurate. This is not this scary disease that's just murdering people all across the country. It was obvious what was taking place. Most people could see straight through it, yet they wanted to cage us up like animals and keep us indoors. They wanted to close businesses down. They wanted to close society down. They wanted to close people from relating with their families, with their loved ones. And it was something that, really mirrored a tyrannical dictatorship, not something that is a democratic system. So the voice of the people certainly isn't being heard. The voice of the people certainly isn't being respected. And what's happened is the level has gone down so much that people have got used to the low quality level of governance and the low quality level of a democratic system that we're living in. And that's simply, it's sad, really. And I agree with you, something needs to shift, something needs to change in order for us to get back to some level of greatness in our country. We all desire to be somewhere that, where we can be proud of what's going on in this country,
Well, you've started an incredible movement. I Am British. Tell us a little bit about it, why you've decided to pick up this mantle now. I've been, a little disclaimer, I have been involved in some of the stuff that you're doing, you're producing, you're bringing out.
Very much so.
And I Am British has my full wholehearted support, because I am British. I'm very proud of the fact I'm British. I am proud of the fact that other people are British, irrespective of race, religion, whatever their feelings are this is an identification of what it means to be British, and that encompasses 1,000,001 different things, because we have so many different people here that form the United Kingdom. But why do you feel now is the time? Why bring this in this moment?
Well, I Am British has got actually a long story. I'll try not make it a long story, but I mean a long history. So 2016 to 2018, I actually ran the I Am British movement, and we did quite a lot of good work, and went somewhat and some distance in encouraging the then president of America, Donald Trump, to come to the UK when Sadiq Khan and Theresa May and all these people were discouraging him. And one of our videos, we got a report that was taken by Dan Scavino, who was President Trump's PA at the time. One of our videos was taken by him into the White House to show Donald Trump, to encourage him to come to Britain. And that video was myself basically just saying, look, don't listen to the news, don't listen to these. The Mayor of London and the Prime Minister. A lot of the British people I just can't wait for you to visit and respect you, etc., etc. So, I Am British is not something that is new, but from 2018, I went into British Lives Matter, then the Reclaim movement, and at this time, it was actually the Remembrance Day. What happened on Remembrance Day when the cenotaph was desecrated a few weeks before, and the Remembrance Day was like totally washed with the pro-Palestinian mob, and it showed such a disrespect for British culture, and I could see that the British people are so upset. The British people went out en masse from the call of Tommy Robinson, Turning Point UK, and they went out en masse to make sure that the Remembrance Day procession was not disturbed, and that the cenotaph was not desecrated on a sacred day in British culture. And then the media flipped that whole thing into far-right hooligans, and the police seemed so complicit in that whole narrative being formed. And I just thought, look, I can't just be quiet. I can't just sit back. I have to do something. So I thought, let me bring I Am British back to the forefront. Let's get that going again. For people who are demoralized, let's look to raise that morale. And really, the I Am British organization, this time I'm not really calling it a movement, it's an organization, and it's going to serve to lift the spirits and lift the morale of the British people, to remind people that we are a great nation, that we are a great people, we are a great culture. Our history is great. Our traditions are great. We are proud of them. We love them. We cherish them. And there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing racist about that. And there's something that is worth fighting for. And there's something that is worth standing for. And that is our wonderful culture. And it's something that needs protecting. And I Am British is something to be a vehicle for that kind of sentiment. But not to be mistaken. It's not something that is strictly saying if you're not British, you can't be connected to this organization or you can't be involved in this. No, not at all. We live in a nation with people that have come from all over the world.
Yeah.
That is not something where that is going to change. It's also not something that we should be trying to alter in terms of, right, we need to kick people out of this country if you're not, 5 generations proven to be British. No, it's not the right concept. That's not the right method. But what we are saying is that this country, if you come to this country, if you live in this country, there's a culture that has made this country this amazing place to live, this amazing place to be in, and this desirable place for people all around the world. And that culture not only has to be preserved, it has to be respected, it has to be honored, and it has to be something that is not allowed to be stripped away or disintegrated. And if you're somebody that agrees with that sentiment, then definitely the I Am British organization is something that you can be connected to, that you can be involved in, because this is about the respect and preservation of this wonderful culture that we call the British culture.
And I'll be honest with you, Ricky, I don't think it could have come at a better time, because, like you so rightly pointed out, there is so much being done to erode British culture, to erode our cultural heritage. I do a lot of political speeches and things of that nature, and one of them I said, I'm proud to be British. I'm proud of our heritage. And the reason I can say that is because, yes, we have made mistakes in the past, but a great nation is one that learns from the mistakes and never repeats them. And that is part of, for me, the British culture, the British heritage that we have. Yes, we had major issues with the slave trade. We're not the only country in the world that has had that problem.
Far from it.
You know, people forget the 1.5 million Europeans that were abducted and sold into slavery by the North African Barbary pirates. They forget that right now in the Middle East, slavery is still an everyday practice, still acceptable.
Right.
So when Britain gets involved in the eradication of slavery, we spend millions and millions of pounds back in the early 1800s to patrol the seas and basically eradicate the slave trade across the world. So I take pride as a proud British man that comes from a very mixed cultural heritage. My mother's family were French. My father's family are Scottish of descent. You know, I'm a strong, fiery Celt. I'm a proud Welshman, but I'm a proud British person, and I stand up for my British values, my British culture, my British heritage, because although many people now call you and I, because of the color of our skin and who we are, you know, we're racist and all of these things, I am none of those things. And this country may have done the things that has happened in the past. You can't deny those and rewrite those things. But the simple fact of the matter is there's not a single person alive today that has lived through the oppression of the slave trade. You know, the furor around it, this manufactured oppression of this current age is purely that. It's completely manufactured. People have no idea what genuine oppression is living in Western society. And I hear this thing. I've talked with Reverend Calvin Robinson about it when we talk about systemic racism. If we had such a thing as systemic racism, you wouldn't have the platform you've got to say that we have systemic racism, because your voice wouldn't count at all.
You wouldn't get there.
No, exactly.
If there was real systemic racism, then nobody of a contrasting race to those that were creating the systemic racism would get a voice or a platform or to do anything. They would be completely held back, and that was something that was proved by Hitler and his Nazi party, that there'd be no room for an alternative race. So that the results are what count, and the results of this nation prove without a shadow of a doubt, it's conclusive, that Britain is not a racist country.
Well,
British people
we've seen it.
are not racist.
We've seen the very thing, the kind of national oppression that we're talking about. We saw it right up until 1994 when Mandela became president in South Africa. Apartheid was only abolished in that period. I remember the elections. I remember being in South Africa around the time of the elections, the queues and queues, miles and miles long, because it was the first time that black Africans could actually vote in a national election. You know, because of the oppression they'd gone through, because of the suppression of an individual people under the apartheid of South Africa. And kids nowadays, youngsters nowadays, millennials nowadays, they haven't got a clue what it's like to live in those conditions. You know, somebody looks at you the wrong way and they're racist and you're oppressing. We've got culture in the UK is going so far wrong. And I blame a lot of it on the indoctrination that they get in schools, universities. I blame, to a certain extent, us as parents for allowing that to happen. And allowing our children to behave a particular way. And if a school won't teach a generation, then it's incumbent upon us as parents to do so. So I think we've got a lot of lessons to learn. I think that we've got a lot of progress to to make in moving forward as we really bring back to the forefront what British culture is and how every person can be a part of that culture up until the point you attempt to supplant and destroy that culture?
Well, I think it's poised for that type of drive, and it's not something that I see coincidental. That, you know, myself, I'm a Christian pastor. You're also a Christian bishop. You mentioned Father Calvin Robinson. You know, it's not surprising that the centre of the pushback for British culture has got to, you know, have some connection to Christianity, because that's our foundation. That is the core of our culture. Many people might not want to admit it, but that's the truth. And the truth is what matters. And what we're being faced with is just too many lies, too many falsities, false narratives, and that false narrative of Britain being this hyper-racist, intolerant nation is just not true. Go to other nations around the world, go to some certain African nations, go to China, go to Russia, go to certain places around the world and try and see if the tolerance level and the non-racism level is the same as Britain. You'll find Britain is like the best in the world. So it's just a false narrative that, like I said, is used to demoralize and used to kind of push agendas, but it's simply not the truth. And, you know, Britain is an amazing place. And like you said, all we can do is look to raise the morale of the people, unite the people, and make this place, you know, somewhere where we cherish our culture. And, you know, the right government could help do that from their position. We'll do the best that we can with I Am British and with whatever platforms and whatever way that we can do that. And I think it's important. It's not only for Britain, it's for the whole of the Western world, you know, and Judeo-Christian values as a whole, you know.
I think it's, like I said, I think it's best placed, and the timing on it is absolutely perfect. There is definitely a cry from the people of this nation for something different than the status quo. We're fed up of the norm and looking for the change. And I think I Am British and other vehicles like that are the opportunity to not just cry out for change, but to actually go out and be the change that we are crying out for. Now, thank you for being with us this week on the Common Sense Podcast. My final moments of the show, I now give to our guests to your final thought. It's not like Jerry Springer and his final thought, which was completely manufactured. If you had a couple of minutes to give a message to the public that you want them to hear, and so we give you the floor. Ricky, what is it you want us to know?
So this is a message for the people of Britain. There is hope. There is hope. There's a hope in a great future. There's hope in a great nation. There's hope in a great people. So don't believe the noise. Don't believe the lies. Don't believe the false narratives. We're a great nation and a great people with a great culture. And we can be proud. And there's so many millions of people across this nation that are proud of this country. And we can never give up. Never give up on our nation. Never give up on our heritage or our culture or our identity, because it's what makes us unique. It's what makes us special. And just know that if you stand for British culture, if you stand for Judeo-Christian values, you're on the winning side. The battle is already won. The battle is already settled, and I am British.
Well, there we have it, folks. What wonderful wisdom to leave the show with this week. Thank you for joining us on the Common Sense Podcast, and thank you again to my guest, the rock pastor himself, Pastor Ricky Doolan, a truly, truly gifted and unique individual with a passion for the United Kingdom. And I would leave you with one final thought. This is Great Britain, because every single one of us are great Britons. Until I see you on the next show,